What's up, guys? I want to spend a few moments here today answering a question that I've been getting more and more recently. And it's a question that I think is very relevant to me, not only because I am a watch enthusiast and a content creator that focuses on horology, but also because I'm a vintage watch dealer. And the question is, how should someone entering the hobby of wristwatches first start getting into vintage watch collecting? And my answer might kind of shock you. It is 2:35 p.m. Let's get down to business. So that's a great question. How should someone entering the hobby of wristwatches first get into vintage watch collecting? Well, my answer is that you probably shouldn't. Okay, and I'm not even trying to be funny here. The truth is, vintage watch collecting is a whole different animal than just watch collecting as a whole, and I really don't think that vintage watches should be the first place you look. Okay, and there's a few reasons why. First is that you don't really know what you're interested in yet. You don't really know how you are going to feel wearing a modern watch and what kinds of watches you wear and how a watch fits in your day-to-day life. And just bringing in something as kind of delicate and complicated and finicky as a vintage watch into your new burgeoning lifestyle when it comes to wearing a watch in the first place, it's just not super prudent in my opinion. And again, there's a reason for that. Vintage watches are kind of a headache to own, period, let alone, if you really don't know much about watches yet. Okay, so wearing a modern watch, they're typically more robust, and there's kind of a larger margin for error when wearing a modern watch. I'm wearing something as beefy as a Seiko Tuna right now, but even if I was just wearing a simple, let's say Hamilton khaki, like a field watch, it's definitely not as robust as this watch, but still it's a modern watch. I could kind of bang it on a table corner and not really have to worry about it, and it's fine. Or, oh, I splashed it a little bit. It's fine. Hamilton khakis aren't known for having very good water resistance ratings, but still, if I was washing my hands and I got some water on it, I don't think that I would freak out. With a vintage watch, both of those scenarios would be like catastrophic for the most part, unless you have, a Rolex with an oyster case and a threaded crown, which we actually do have at the shop right now. But, it's very different skill set when it comes to purchasing a vintage watch than a modern watch. And there's, different questions you kind of have to ask when buying a vintage watch versus buying a modern watch. There's often more obscurity when it comes to buying vintage watches, so sometimes getting information about hyper-specific watches that, have a bunch of different reference numbers, but then kind of subcategories within that reference numbers, and then we're talking about various variations within these little subcategories. There is just a really big rabbit hole, and again, all of these things make vintage watch collecting addictive for me because it's the whole thrill of the hunt and the consumption of information that makes vintage watch collecting really appealing to me. But if you don't know much about what it's like to wear a watch or how your watch wearing will affect your everyday life, I don't think that having a vintage watch on your wrist day to day should be the first place that you look. Another concern that you need to pay attention to when buying a vintage watch are authenticity concerns. And I understand that some of these things have overlaps with just general watch collecting. Obviously, if you're purchasing a modern watch, there's authenticity concerns. You want to be asking questions. You want to make sure that you're spending your money in the correct place and you're not buying a fake. But with vintage watches, the Franken watches out there, the straight up fakes, the redials, it's just very, very common in the vintage watch sphere, So I'm going to give you an example. Buying a modern Oris, even like gray market, buying a modern Oris, you're probably not going to bump into a fake Oris on the secondhand market. It's not super common as far as a modern Oris. Vintage Oris watches are almost always produced in India, and they're all fakes. So I know what you're thinking, wow, this vintage watch dealer is making vintage watch collecting sound really unappealing right now. And the truth is, I'm not trying to scare you away from it. I just think that you should kind of gain a knowledge base, not only knowledge about watches, but a knowledge about what you're interested in when it comes to various kinds of watches. And then when you have a few watches and you've worn a few modern watches for a little while, then maybe go ahead and start, taking a peek at pulling a trigger on a vintage watch. And when you get to that point, for sure, me and the Time Teller Shop, we're here to help you. And again, I would love to sell you a vintage watch. I just also think that it would be disingenuous for me to tell a brand new watch collector to buy a vintage watch from me. That's not what I would recommend. So when you do get to the point that you're interested in a vintage watch, you can go ahead and send any question you have at info@thetimetellershop.com, and we will try to point you in the right direction. Even if you're not purchasing a watch from us, we want to make sure you don't get screwed. And just have fun with the watch collecting hobby and let it take you wherever it does, okay? I didn't know that I was going to be obsessed with vintage watches when I bought my first watch. I didn't know that that's what was going to happen. The hobby kind of led me there, and I'm happy it did and kind of changed my life. But the truth is, even if you don't have any interest whatsoever in vintage watches, doesn't mean you're not a legit watch collector. Even if you're only interested in vintage watches, that doesn't mean you're more of a watch collector or less of a watch collector. It just means that you have found your little, corner that you want to chill in with your little dunce cap because you're an idiot and you spend all your money on a watch. Doesn't matter what watch you're interested in. You're going to end up spending too much money on it, and that makes you a dunce. I'm there as well. We are all just terrible addicts. So yeah, guys, I just wanted to kind of answer that question, and whenever someone asks me this question, I will link them to this episode. So I'm kind of doing myself a favor there. And also, I'm going to try to do you a favor. We're running a huge promotion over at the shop right now. We did a massive restock at the beginning of this month. We have a Patek there. We have a Rolex there. We have a Zenith Movado there. And then we have a whole bunch of really, really affordable, crazy, awesome vintage luxury watches. And when you use the coupon code LUCKY, you get them at an insane discount, so don't miss out. All right, guys, I will catch you on the next one. Leave me a comment and let me know what your favorite vintage watch is and when you got into vintage watch collecting. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay blessed. I'm Jory Goodman, the Time Teller. Always remember, I didn't invent time. I just tell it.